This is Anna Hamilton with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Today is Sunday, November 10th at 9:30, almost exactly. We're at the Gracie Downtown Jiu-Jitsu School to interview Francine and Liya Ishmael for the Pensacola Environmental Oral History Project. I'm joined by my colleagues from the Oral History Program as well as the Gulf Scholars Program. So with that, I would love to have y'all introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about who you are.
My name is Francine Ishmael. I'm the daughter of Margaret Louise Williams. She was the president of Citizens Against Toxic Exposure. I grew up in Pensacola. I was born and raised here, lived here the first 17 years of my life. I moved away to Gainesville, Florida, with the goal of living there for 5 years, and I ended up staying 15 and a half years. I had an older sister that had moved there and was going to school at University of Florida. So I stayed there, and I communicated with my mom on a regular basis, and she was talking to me about the different things that were going on in the community and how she was being approached by some of the homeowners between the two Superfund sites that we grew up around to discuss some concerns that they had about the air, the water, and people that were getting sick from just being outside and playing around, kids playing around in the area. And with that and the help of the community, they came together and formed an organization back in the spring of '92 called Citizens Against Toxic Exposure. And that's where I guess the Pandora's box opened up when they start to discover that we were living within a quarter mile of two contaminated sites that were affecting the health and the well-being of the community. And so she went on a mission and was voted to become the president because no one else wanted to do it. It was really a job that she took upon herself because she loved her community. And she loved, the people that she worked with and grew up around and worshiped with. And it became concerning for her. So she stepped out and just really made her voice heard and made a big difference in the community and getting stakeholders involved in trying to make this right. And here we are. And I'll let my husband pick up on how we got to this point.
My name's Liya Ishmael. I'm 71 years old. I was born and raised in Pensacola, Florida, closer to downtown, within 5 miles of downtown. The majority of my aunts, uncles, and extended family lived in the area we called it Goulding. 2 blocks, 3-block area at some times. And it was just adjacent to the agrochemical company, and there was another chemical company adjacent to that. But it's a big industrial area, just like Cantonment was founded with the paper mill there. People migrated to it. Well, this fertilizer plant, people migrated to it. It was right outside of the city limits, and it was jobs. I won't go into the history of how it was subdivided and all of that, but my family being extended up there, we had relatives living there, and we had property. We owned property up there. So some of the property we farmed, basically. And I had no idea why our plants were growing huge and all of this stuff. You didn't have to fertilize them, all kind of fruit on the trees and stuff. It was directly related to the toxic fertilizers, the yellow fog that I used to play in as a kid when we went up there. We didn't know. We had no idea that it was toxic. But hindsight's always 20/20. We grew up there, and I developed autoimmune disease, asthma, diabetes, you name it. And usually that happens when you're exposed and you have a history in your family, which I had both. I subsequently went to school and got very interested in medicine. Got a job at a hospital, a teaching hospital, and I worked there 4.5 years. So I had a lot of jobs there. I started out as an orderly, EKG tag, you name it, I did it. And working in the ER was what I really loved to do. When you like to do something, it's not work. So I learned all I could in this teaching hospital where doctors were taught. And I stayed there about 4.5 years. I was recruited to go to another hospital. They started a flight program, and we started Life Flight. And I had a major part in doing that, and also was the lead technician at the Gulf Region Poison Center. So I got a lot of medical training and specific training in poison information early on. I was one of the people that was being relocated because in my growing up, I had relatives and I inherited one of the houses, so I moved there. And my kids came with me, and we lived happily ever after, I thought. But the toxic exposure stuff came up about us being exposed, and ignorance is bliss. Didn't know growing up, but then when I started examining my surroundings, window panes that you can't see out of because of the etching of the chemicals that were released from the plants. And when I grew up, I found out that that same stuff was affecting me. I was a very, very, very bad asthmatic. I couldn't walk a block. And I almost died of status asthmaticus at about the age of 11. I mean, almost died. Once I got over that, grew up with all of these autoimmune problems and really didn't know why. So I kind of got recruited because I knew what was going on. I got firsthand information. My family had a higher cancer rate than the national average, just living in that 2-block area. So I was motivated to become part of CATE, and Ms. Williams asked me to come in and do some community instructions and stuff like that. Education. And we educated the general public, anybody who wanted to come, but mainly the people that were in this area, and let them know what we had to do. And that's part of our settlement to get money to educate the people. And we had medical monitoring, which was taken away. But to make a long story short, that's how I got involved. And we did a lot of education, information, and work with the people, but that was the good part. The relocation and all the compensation and other stuff was totally a different story. And I'll leave that at that. That's how I got involved with CATE.
So he was hired as our educator between the CDC funding that we were getting and the health department funding that we were getting to provide educational workshops to our community. And we would plan these workshops, and we would have topics and do the research and talk to our community members in layman's term where they can understand a lot of this language that the average person could not read through it. A lot of the chemical components and compounds that were involved in those samples that we were taking at some point. And he was very good at dissecting that information so that people could really understand the impact of this dirt that is sitting on this mountain, the water that we have to drink and cook with and clean with, and how bad it is, And for EPA to come in at some point during the relocation and make a statement that the water doesn't travel across the street, so there's no real contamination to be concerned about, was a little perplexing to me. So, but it does travel, and it does carry the same type of contamination that it started with. And that's really what brought us to the second relocation of the second group that was directly across from the skin retreating company. They didn't want to be a part of the first one because the EPA had stepped in and successfully divided and conquered that group and have them branch out on their own. Manipulation. That's all it is, divide and conquer. And so after they formed their group, they began to get the testing, and they found that, yeah, it was contaminated, if not more. And so they implemented a relocation for them. However, that relocation was a little bit different because their properties were deemed more commercial, less residential. So there were few people that ended up really doing well with the settlement from the relocation, but there were others that did not from the first relocation. So again, you had the divide and the conquer between the communities because it was not a fair relocation process. It was the first African American relocation project that had ever occurred in this country, and they had no policy. They had a uniform relocation policy that only applied to military bases. So they had nothing that could help them with an African American community when it came to relocation.
We weren't the pattern that they followed with Love Canal. It was
Right.
totally different.
Right. Totally
Totally different. And we were the second in the country to be relocated. Now, if you go to that site now where we lived, there's about a 75-foot or 100-foot hole there for the whole neighborhood. But it wasn't contaminated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's being excavated. If you go there now, you'll see it.
Yeah. Make sure you get down
Yeah.
there and take some photos of that area. And they are doing some mitigation with the water that they said wasn't an issue, but they're working on that as well. That's part of, I guess, the last administration funding or the prior administration funding to get some of the areas that were left off or did not complete the water areas, the areas where the water was contaminated in that Clorinda triangle. So they are working on mitigations for that now. But it just makes a big difference when it comes to you're looking at African American communities that are always constantly being perpetrated by these corporations because they know that these communities are the ones that are going to be what is the word that I'm trying to use? The least resistant because of the limited resources that they have to work with. So they have to rely on a voice for them. And that's where some of the community stakeholders come in.
Tell them about the contamination, not only there, but it goes all the way to Baby Park. Now, those people, when they compensated them, was totally fair. And they didn't even take their property. They just put a well and made them cap their water wells that's going that direction. So they treated us totally different.
Yeah. And as a part of the relocation, there was a medical monitoring program that was implemented, and it was to really mimic the Love Canal. And because Lois Gibbs and my mom worked together, Lois was one of the first people to become a part of this fight with her, and she was very instrumental in getting the empowerment process up and running. She was here fighting with the group, and she was very instrumental in helping formulate this medical monitoring, which would have provided the resources for an indefinite period of time, as long as the money was there, to help the individuals in the community for like co-pays, things that their insurance did not pay, helping them get just basic needs met that they could not get met with their own insurance or didn't have any. And just continuing to provide them with the resources to educate them on how to take care of themselves in a community that's been affected by these contaminations. And so we went back to court to fight for that money, and they gave it back to the corporation. It was about $2 million that went back to ConocoPhillips, which were the ones that had to pay out that money for that medical monitoring. And I thought that was the most humiliating thing that could have ever been done.
Now, we know that chemical exposures don't always rear their ugly heads in our bodies immediately. A lot of it's done downstream later when you get older. And that medical monitoring would have assisted all the people that's coming down with diseases from living up there with their medical problems now. But it was just taken away.
Can you help us understand like why that decision was made to send the money back to the corporation instead of extend it to
We
you all
weren't
for
privy to
monitoring?
that information, even though we lobbied hard for it not to happen. It wasn't something we were in control of. It was the attorneys.
And it was not put in the trust of the Kate. It was put in the trust of the lawyers to handle it. And that, again, we felt that that was a conflict. If it was money that was won for the organization, it was money that should have been sent to the organization, and that was not the case. And so, when you have Conoco that have their lawyers advocating for their company to get this money back, we were limited. We're a grassroots organization. We are very limited in the resources that we have to fight against them. But we were hoping that they would do the right thing.
And when you think about it sounds like you are making obviously a very personal connection to the toxic exposure and the impacts on yourselves as well as your neighbors and family. Can you give us a sense of the health, like were there health studies or what the health studies looked like?
Yeah, we had a study with the Escambia County Health Department where we had funds that were legislated for our community health environment project. And that's where we went out into the community, work with the community members to get them to go into the health department for a basic exam and self-report information about their conditions, their family conditions. And we had a list of individuals, well, from the health department, we did get an informal list of self-reported illnesses from individuals that lived between those two Superfund sites. Respiratory problems was a big one, various types of cancers, birth defects, reproductive issues among women. I mean, it was just horrendous. And these were just self-reported because, again, finding a chemist and a doctor and a lawyer to work together to identify, yeah, these chemicals are directly related to these conditions is a hard thing to do. They may admit it, but you need to see it documented. And we all know that common sense can tell you, yeah, if you're exposed to dioxin, it's going to affect you in some way, shape, or form. Period. But, we did what we could with the resources that we had. We had the documented self-reported illnesses based on our community environmental health project that we ran for about 5 years. And out of maybe 6,000 individuals that we had listed, we were able to access at least half of those in getting them to participate in the project. Having more would have been better, but you can't force people to do something, especially if there's no benefit for them. The benefit is finding out if you have something. And in one case, there was a gentleman that went there and he was able to determine that he had early stages of prostate cancer that was saved. I mean, he had no idea. And some people just don't want to know if you have something that could be prevented. I don't get that. I don't get that. And the comment would be, well, I just don't want to know. Why wouldn't you want to know, especially if it's something that can be prevented? So those were some of the illnesses that were being reported. There were some pictures of children that had some birth defects, enlarged hand, something with the facial. Something happened. The young man's face was just
Palsy.
deformed. No, it was some kind of birth defect
Okay.
that he had. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was. I mean, he was born in that area up there. But the most one that stood out was the cancer-related deaths from individuals.
Looking back and knowing what we know now and looking at how much more the general population is educated about toxic chemicals. And this was kind of new back then because we ran the poison center and we were always getting calls about everything except the things that we are cognizant of now, the cosmetics we use, the soap and all that. We only got calls about kids eating stuff or people overdosing. It's a totally different world now. People are aware of what they eat could be poisoning them, what their containers comes in could be poisoning them. I mean, we're much more aware in our society now than we were then about the dangers of everything around us being toxic. Then I would pray that if this ever happened again, that the knowledge of the communities and this population would force the government to do the right thing. Because it was so new then that's the way they got around the medical monitoring. You don't need that. Well, a lot of things show up later, but you do need it. You need it for the rest of your life if you expose or if you're raised in a toxic area. Now, one thing I didn't mention that we did find, and it was immediately taken off the internet, and that wasn't a time that you could just press and print. You had to find. We found that same fertilizer plant was using depleted uranium when they first opened to make fertilizer. Now, they took it off as soon as we found out that was part of it, and I can understand why my family had the higher cancer rate than the United States population. Just about everybody up there had cancer.
And that plant sits directly across from another community. And we did some testing over there, and there were some small levels of radon found in some of those properties. We tried to get that neighborhood involved, and they just would not budge. It was after the fact that they decided that they wanted to come in, but by then everything was already in motion. I don't understand the hesitancy about wanting to be a part of a group that's wanting to make sure that the air you breathe, the water you drink, and the soil that you use to nurture your yard and grow fruits and vegetables is safe for you to eat. But it was after the fact that they decided that they wanted to come in, and by then, we couldn't do anything other than just document their engagement. We had technical grants for years that we had applied for and had experts working with us to do the testing and the deciphering the information so that we can present it in a way that they can understand it.
Can you help us understand? So, it sounds like there are a lot of, there are 3 different kind of community groups working for their specific neighborhoods, but they're all really close. Can you help us understand how, these neighbors decided to be a part of this, or just how those kind of lines were formed?
I think it's a little bit more than that because I think the government practices divide and conquer. They offer each community a little something different, and that's the whole thing, to keep them divided. You can't get everybody agreeing on one thing, and we'll give you what we want, and we'll take part of it back.
Yeah.
That's basics.
When EPA came down, and they wanted to do a community group with the communities, our community, everybody. And instead of doing it in an open forum, they wanted to individualize these talks with everybody. So this is what they did. We had the meeting at the church. They were in the annex, very small portion of the church. And they had tables set up and different people at the table. And you walk in there and you got 10 conversations going on. Nobody can hear what anyone is saying or understand what anyone is saying. So we broke for lunch. And I said, as the director of the organization, we're taking this meeting into the church sanctuary. We need more space. We need one person talking, and the rest of the people can listen. So when we got back from lunch, they could not get into the annex because it was locked. So we went into the church, and they were livid that they had to have an open forum and have a conversation with the community and have everybody listen at one time, because what they did was not conducive to a community group engaging in that process. They did not like that. They did not like it at all. But it was what it was, and it had to be done because you cannot communicate with a group of people in a room and you have 10 conversations going on. No one knew what they were talking about. And it just seemed like they wanted us to believe that everybody was agreeable to what they were saying, and nobody really knew what they were saying. So that was just one little situation, and they did not like that. But I mean, it's our community. You have to come in and give us the respect, and at least listen to what we have to say, and don't just, think that it's okay to have everybody in here cross talking and not getting anything accomplished. But it was the divide and conquer that really pulled the community apart.
There
And
was no, excuse me, there was no standardization as to how you would be compensated for your property. We had property and it was divided, it had a couple of houses on it. And it took us a year to get relocated once the word got out, everything. And we had renters and those people moved immediately. So we didn't get compensated for that property because in a year's time, property falls into disrepair. You know it's not going to be lived on anymore. So it's not worth anything. It was not fairly done over the whole spectrum of the relocation. And I'm not saying that some people didn't get compensated fairly, but a lot of them did not. And it was kind of obvious to see how the money was being dispersed. It was almost no rhyme and reason how they did it. If you were a good person, you cooperated with them, you got whatever you wanted.
well, they did not allow you to get your own appraiser. They were using the government appraisers, which was not a good idea. They were lowballing the properties because they were considered contaminated. But you got two Superfund sites between a quarter mile. It's on an industrial parkway. Everything on Palafox Street, just about coming into Pensacola, is industrial. Those neighborhoods were surrounded by industries and companies. And so a lot of them did not get the proper compensation that they deserved. Only a few got decent settlements. Decent settlements. A couple of people had to go into mortgages coming out of that, which was part of a policy that should never happen. They should not be going into a worse situation than they're coming out of. One individual went into a home that was not inspected properly. There was gas leak, and she had to get $5,000 to get that taken care of. And my mom, with her persistence, she worked with the engineers or the Corps of Engineers or whoever was doing that to make sure that she got her money back. Because she had to borrow this money from a family member and get this fixed because she could not live in this house with the leaking gas furnace. One woman, an elderly lady, she was put into a home, floors with the holes in them.
Yeah.
And when some of these homeowners found out about this relocation, they just started slapping paint on a lot of these houses that these individuals moved into, and the federal government did not properly inspect them like they should have. So it just created a lot of animosity among the community members, and they wanted to blame my mom for this. I mean, she didn't make the final decision. She was part of trying to get the help that we needed. She didn't have control over the costs of what they gave them for their homes, or the settlement. We weren't a part of that. And it was a just take it or leave it type of mentality that we had to deal with. And and this was with the Corps of Engineers. We had an individual that was a high-ranking official with the Corps of Engineers, and I think he was even a minister. Don't know what that has to do with him being a Corps of Engineers, but he had two roles. And he told a story about a woman who was a Caucasian woman. She was a part of the relocation. She received her full relocation package in addition to the settlement for the property. So the package was maybe up to $22,000 and then whatever the value that they put on the house. Well, this woman had moved out before the relocation process started. And part of that policy was that you have to be in that area for a period of time before the relocation was actually implemented. They didn't share a lot of this information. People were just uneasy because they did not know what they were dealing with. And they were uneasy because some of them did know what they were dealing with based on their own personal experience about the exposure to the soil, to the water, and the air from the different chemical plants. So they started to make a quick exodus and leave, and that forfeited their relocation settlement. For the renters,
Same thing.
it was the same thing. And so they just left and got nothing. And so this story that this official was telling in the church, and then my mom, she moves. She doesn't get her $22,000. She just gets the value of the house that they appraised it. And she had a small little lot across the street. She did get a little bit for that, but it was just not fair overall, the way that they just handled everything, because they did not have the guidelines that they should have been following. They didn't have anything. So it was just knee-jerk decisions that they were making. And it was affecting the lives of the people in those communities. You wouldn't think growing up eating these huge, beautiful plums on the trees or pomegranates, would be part of the soil that is affecting the health of the people that lived in the community. I had a sister that used to eat the dirt. I don't know why she used to eat the dirt. She was just a kid, but my mom used to really have problems with her eating this dirt. I could remember as a child seeing the windows with the sulfur from the agrochemical plant on it. We used to sleep with our windows up. I had a small bout with asthma as a child. Kind of grew out of it. Haven't had any issues before. But I've had a lot of other health conditions that came upon me after moving from that area. A lot of reproductive issues. And it's just not right. It's not right. It's not fair. And then when you look at other communities that have had issues similar and have been relocated, you would be amazed at the homes that these individuals have been put in. And it's nowhere near where we are here with the community that was dismantled because of all of this relocation and the chemicals and just the fear of knowing that you've lived near these sites. The Escamilla Treating Company, they went bankrupt. They had employees that lived in the community that worked there. They went bankrupt. They sold the company to the community members who worked there, and they ended up having to go bankrupt. There was an insurance policy, a liability policy, over $2 million. Nobody can explain where that happened. What happened to it? Where is it? Where does it go? And you have no one accountable for the Escamilla Treating Company because all those individuals are gone. There may be some family members, generations, 5, 6 generations that are still around, but they have nothing to do with that. That was not a decision making from them. So there was no liability from that company, and the money that was part of the settlement came from the ConocoPhillips. Yeah. So it was, it's been an interesting journey, seeing my mom in action that way, because she really had a voice that made you listen. She used to always say that she didn't have to use foul language or be loud and obnoxious, but just speak and speak clearly and speak with your truth, and people will listen. She would tell you that she could be cussing you out and you have no idea that's what she's doing because of the gracefulness that she presented when she provided you with the information that she wanted you to know. Would you agree to that?
I agree wholeheartedly. And I was sitting here thinking, we're talking about our exposures and what we went through as a community, guess what? It's everybody's problem now
Yeah.
because it's in your food, it's in the clothes that you wear, it's in every dye that you put on. I mean, we all been exposed.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the degree that we were overtly, but now we all have to read the labels,
Yeah.
especially on your food.
Yeah. My sister has an app that she introduced me to. It's called the Yucca app. And it will tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly of foods and products that you put in and on your body. And what I'm thinking is might be the best one was actually the worst one. You see the ingredients on the back and you see what the ingredients are for. I'm not sure if I want to see this app all the time because it's really going to make you so much aware of what you're eating
Yeah, you'll be aware that
and what you're putting in your
why
body.
that food tastes so good.
Yeah. And I find that I'm enjoying, as much as I don't like to cook, I cook more at home because I know what's in my food. I know what I put in it. I know my hands are clean. I know that I'm not coughing all over the place in my food. And it really tastes much better when you're eating your own food at home. When you start looking at the products that you put on your face. I don't wear makeup like some women do. I may wear a light powder, but as far as like mascara, lipstick, and I'm not knocking that from any woman. If that's what you want to do, go for it. I mean, I'm just not that person. I like natural. I like to just be myself, maybe a little plain, but that I'm okay with that because I know that I'm not putting stuff that's going to be harmful to me on my body. That's why I stopped coloring my hair because I'm thinking about the dye. It was drying out my hair. Why is this color drying out my hair?
You mean that's not color in your hair?
No, it's not color in my hair. This is all you being funny. So I had to embrace the gray, and I'm okay with that. I have no problem with it. I don't mind it. But it's just some of those things that you start thinking more about. Same thing with clothes. I am so upset about so many clothing products that are not made in America. I have an issue with that.
Don't start with the clothes because clothes are one of the number one polluters of our planet.
Yeah.
Don't start with that.
And plastic.
Yeah.
And
Clothes are
plastic.
plastic.
Well, okay.
But it makes you much more aware of what you put in you and what you put on you.
Yeah.
It can really shorten your life if you're not aware of those things.
Yeah.
And some of it we come in contact with every day.
Yeah.
You all have really helped us understand kind of the time when Kate's forming and even when you're young and experiencing health issues, till now where really we are, like we can have an app that tells us how toxic this,
Yes,
that, or
yes.
the other thing may be. But you've talked about how it was really incumbent upon you not just to say, hey, we're maybe getting sick, but also to understand exactly what that chemistry is and it turns you into a scientist, into a policy analyst, to a regulatory person where you have to know, like, these are how these companies run, this is what the process is, this is what it means for our community. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process of how you all did the research to understand what was happening, what the pollutants were, and how it connected to the health of you and your families and the community, and then also what that education and those conversations look like?
Part of that was my job. When I was hired as the educator, I was the lead poison information specialist at the Gulf Region Poison Center, which was run at Baptist Hospital. Basically, I was Mr. Yuck. If anybody remember the green Mr. Yuck stickers, we get tons of calls from families and kids being exposed to these things, people leaking toads, you name it. So we had to be very well versed on toxicity. And that was kind of a new field then. We had only one or two PhDs that actually practiced that type of medicine toxicity and studies. So we went to Denver and studied under Dr. George Wood, who was Memphis, Tennessee, excuse me, and he was a PhD in toxicologist, and that's how we got the poison center started. And it was regular updates on every kind of toxin that there was. We started teaching, especially the stuff that being exposed to, started giving the community that information so they could know how to manage their health. And that was one of the biggest disappointments when they took away the medical monitoring, because a lot of times things happen down the road when you're exposed early on. But that's basically how we got the information out to the people. We had a very good turnout, very good turnout. And I will say that the information that I was getting from the CDC, some of it was good information, and some of it was not good information. And the reason I'll say that, I was teaching the information about the flu and how the CDC was saying the flu got here to this country, about the close, the way they raise their animals. They live with their ducks and their fowls and this, that, and the other. And these birds flew across the North Pole every year, and they brought the flu with them. Well, my question was, what about all the people coming on the 747s every day? They shut me down. They said, teach what we tell you, and that's it. So I knew right then I lost a lot of confidence in the CDC. You know, that didn't make sense that ducks would fly across and give us the flu every year. That was the farthest thing from the truth, and I stopped teaching. So they stopped sending me information, but I wasn't going to teach something that wasn't even logical. But some of the information, most of the information that I was getting, especially about the chemicals and their toxicity, came directly from the state of Florida.
And during the early stages, when we were doing the technical grants, we had a scientist, Wilma Subra, who was hired on as a technical assistant with us. She was analyzing the testing results and was able to break that information down, and then Eddie would provide it into the form of our workshops that we were providing to the community. So she did the chemicals components and the parts per billion, what was good, what was bad, what was ugly. And then, Eddie was able to disseminate that to our community to an understanding, where they can say, oh, I didn't know that, I didn't know that would be affecting my health. I didn't know how that would be working, but she was the one that we had on for a while. And she was very good out of New Iberia, Louisiana. She's still around, and she's still doing her work, very sweet person. And she loved what she does, and she loves educating the community. Louisiana is a hot spot. They have a cancer alley in Louisiana. And it's just sad. So that's where we got a lot of the scientific data from, was Miss Subra. And then, Eddie would bring in his expert with the poison center knowledge and incorporate that information into our workshops. So we had some really good workshops. We would provide them with box lunches and, help them understand what that process was with sharing this information and how useful it could be to their just everyday lives, and a lot of the elderly people in the community enjoyed the workshop. We had a transportation. We would pick them up from for the workshops. When we had the medical monitoring money, we would provide transportation to their medical providers. We were helping people get eye exams, eyeglasses that didn't have the funds, the resources to do it. Medications that they couldn't afford, some of the co-pays we were taking care of. And it was just a really good program that we were providing for them, and it was helpful, and everyone enjoyed being a part of it because they were getting something back or something out of it. And it wasn't just about a dollar, it was about the help that needed to be provided to them. We wanted to get to a point where we can put water filters in these homes of these individuals that are having to drink the water and doesn't have the resources to put a filter on their tap water, you know.
During that time, Escambia County had the eighth most dirtiest water in this country. Now, think about how many counties are in the state of Florida, and then think about how many counties there are in this country. It's, I'm surprised we don't glow in the dark.
Yeah. I mean, you have to laugh to keep from really
Yeah.
getting kind of depressed and anxious about what we've lived through. And, there's been some changes, there's been some improvement, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to communities of least resistance because of the lack of the resources that they have to them. The government has an amount of responsibility to all of the people, not just a certain group of people. We're all American citizens. Those that work, we pay taxes in this country. We have a right to be free from any toxic chemicals and pollution that is affecting our neighborhoods, our kids, their learning. I mean, all of that stuff plays a part in who we become as a people. And my mother's job was to share that information, put it out there in the hopes that the community would come together, the stakeholders would come together, the government would come together and do what's right by these communities that have been affected by these chemicals. We did a workshop out at the International Paper Company, and the individuals that came to that workshop were family members that worked at the International Paper Company, and they were generations of people. And when we explained to them how we went around and did testing in the area that they live, work, and play, and how some of these chemicals were just coming right in the front door of their house, and they couldn't understand the connection between the chemicals and the illnesses. I mean, the looks on the faces of these people were dumbfounded. How can you not know that chemicals coming out of this smokestack is going to do something good for you? How do you not? You don't, I mean, they don't care because they pour money into the community to keep them quiet. And that's satisfying to them, but you still are being affected. There's nothing changing. It's a pulp mill plant. It stinks ridiculously out there. And depending on which way the wind blows, we can even get some of it from downwind coming down south.
It's a little better now than it was once they passed the anti-pollution acts. But it was amazing to see how generations have grown up there and they didn't care about the pollution because this is where we've lived and we're not going anywhere else. It was interesting to see that dynamic, and there's a wall when you try to educate people that don't want to be educated. And it was interesting to see how we hit that wall. And some of them did, but the majority of them didn't because there's generations of them that were attached to that land. And the paper company wasn't going away.
No. And we're not asking them to go away. We just want them to be better neighbors. There's a better way to do anything.
It just costs more money.
It does, yeah. But, it may cost more money, but you'll have more people living longer that can work at this plant that you have, if you can just be better neighbors. I mean, because you're polluting the water. I mean, we eat the fish out of the water, I mean, it really, I mean, just, it affects everything, every aspect of your life. And so that's where you have to educate yourself and listen to those that know the truth and speak the truth. and do your own research. Do your own research. It's just like reading the Bible. Don't go and listen to 20 preachers preaching 20 different sermons from 20 different religions. Read for yourself. Get your interpretation. What do you think that you're supposed to be doing? Not what they're telling you you're supposed to be doing. But, she worked hard. She did what she could. She did it with grace. She did it with patience, and she did it with compassion. She was all about love, and that's what she shared. And, she was not the most popular person among some individuals, but that's only because those individuals chose to remain ignorant of the truth. And so you have to keep moving. And she did that. And she did it up until she got sick. And it really weighed on her, and that's when I started to take more interest and more part in being with her, and then eventually getting voted. I wasn't expecting to get voted in as a director, because that was, again, big shoes that I would have to fill. And I did it to the best of my ability, when the resources were available to me, and I feel proud of that. I feel proud that I got a chance to work side by side with her and see her in a different light. She always was my mother. I just, didn't look at her as the president of an organization, but she was fierce. She was a very fierce woman, and she did that in her rearing with her children. But she was about love and doing the right thing for your people in your community. Doesn't matter if you had black or white people in the community. We had white people in our community. It was for the people, all of the people that she was working for. And she did it with a big heart. And for that, I'll always be grateful. And since her passing, it has been difficult to move forward. Excuse me. Without her.
Sorry.
Because between her and my husband, they were my biggest cheerleaders. And it just made a big difference to have her near me to fight alongside her. And, I made some pretty good friends. Lois Gibbs was there. She came to town and did a presentation for me. And I had a professor that, was just infatuated with her. And he got a chance to really meet her, got an autographed book, and that was the best day of his life, and because he wanted me to get her to come out to the university. I'm like, really? That costs money? She's not going to do that for free. But this is what I'll do for you. And I had a list of people that I invited to this reception, and Lois gave us a pep talk, and my professor at that time and his wife got a chance to really meet her, and that made his day. He talked about that. And it just made him feel good that he got a chance to meet her. And I enjoyed what I was doing with my mom, And I could see that it was really fulfilling for her because she made a difference. Whether people liked it or not, she made a difference. And that difference impacted their lives in a better way. There was one example. There was a lady whose husband worked at this game retreating company. There was some type of retirement benefit that she could not remember, couldn't find out about, and she came to my mom, and my mom got busy doing her investigation. And when she finished with finding out what this lady was entitled to from her deceased husband, this woman ended up with an $89,000 check that was sitting for her as some type of retirement that her husband had. And she would have never known about it. She knew something about it, but she didn't know everything and how to access that. And it was just little things like that, and helping the lady that had the furnace, getting EPA to reimburse the brother who she had to go to and get money to pay for this. It was just those little things what she did to make a difference in the community. And she worked very hard. She worked very hard. She remember as a child her father working at the agrochemical plant. They didn't have protective equipment for these workers. And she would tell us how my grandfather would come home covered in yellow dust. He died when I was 2 years old. I don't remember him, but I do remember the yellow dust on the windows because we couldn't keep our windows up at night. That's when a lot of the stuff was going around. The pollution was being exposed a lot at night, you know. So it it's an unfortunate situation that occurred, but it had to happen. It had to happen. And some people, like I said, were not pleased with the outcome. They didn't want to move. That was their home. And they could care less about what was found. But then there was the vast majority of the ones that were on board, you know. But she was all about love and doing what was best for the community that she loved and grew up in. She was born and raised in that community, literally born in the house that she was raised in. And so that, it meant a lot to her. It meant a lot. I had my grandmother. I remember my grandmother. She had 8 miscarriages. My mother was the only surviving child out of 8 miscarriages because of all of this stuff that people have been exposed to, and what was in the food, what was in the water, the soil that you're growing vegetables and fruits in. You think about all of that.
We've talked to some other folks across Pensacola who there were kind of certain moments where people realized what this exposure actually meant. And there was a realization that this is toxic. We've been living our lives here in these ways, and now we're going to have to think about what this means. Was there a moment like that for your mom?
Yes, it was. When she started getting approached by individuals in the other communities, they started having concerns. People were having these respiratory conditions. People were dying from various types of cancers that they couldn't explain, and some of them had no cancer history in their families. Birth defects from children. There were a couple of kids that had some deformities that grew up playing in that soil. And that's what bothered her. And that's when she went out on a mission and started getting this organization formed, getting the right people in place. She knew a county commissioner that was an attorney that came in. She knew individuals that, the scientists, for the technical advisor. I mean, she knew a lot of people, and she surrounded herself with the experts that could help her. Some were in there for their own selfish purposes, just to make money, and some were not. And so, we found out who those were because, there are opportunities. When people see money, they see opportunities. We were getting funding from the CDC, we were getting legislative funding for our other program, we were doing grants. I mean, it was work. It took work to do all of that. It just was not something that you just pick up a book and do. You have to put the work in, the footwork and everything. And so that's where she really, got started, when she started hearing these stories coming from these communities. And something needed to be done about it. And they felt that she would be the one that can do it. And she did. She did what she could while she could.
And I mean, it's incredible to listen to you talk about all of the services that y'all provided and the monitoring and the health study. I mean, it really feels like a huge and very like a dynamic network that you are able to create. Can you, but I mean, she's, like you said, she started it. Can you tell us about how she went about putting together Kate, and how you all were able to kind of develop ways to meet the different and overlapping needs?
Well, like I said, she had homeowners that came to her, and she started her little network. of individuals to help get the process started with getting the articles of incorporation, getting the business part of it taken care of. So she had people helping her with that. And then she was doing her own research to get things done. And then once she got the group formed, they had a contest to come up with the name of the organization. And one of the members won the contest, and that's what they named it. And then they formed the board from the community members and had the board of directors. And all of the board of directors, with exception of two, were a part of the community members that lived, worked, and played in the community. And there were a couple that was a part of the community but not in the community. But they were there to give technical assistance as well. And once the organization formed, then they had to choose a president. And it was no question about who they wanted. It was a question about whether or not she wanted to do it. and she did. And so she was elected to be the president of the organization. And then she started putting her group together. I had been away and I moved back like a year after, maybe a year or two after the organization started. And I was indirectly involved. Became more directly involved as I started to see my mother's health go down. And I had to start, paying more attention to what she was doing, learning more about the job, and one day becoming the director to take over with her help and her support and have her guide me through what she went through. So a lot of what I came into was already set up for me. I just had to come in and do it the way that worked for me, if that makes any sense.
Absolute sense. And how big, like at the height of all of the organizing, how big was Kate and how many people did you serve?
We had about 300 active members. We had more on the books, but we only had about 300 active members that actively engaged with us. We had over 6,000 people between those communities that we considered our members, part of our organization, whether they paid dues or not. We still consider them members of CADE. But actively, we had about 300 members that was with us, ride or die. And that was very encouraging.
And how big, what is the status of Kate now and what are you all working on?
Right now, we're not active. We are still around administrative wise. I'm just basically managing the administrative part of the organization. I do still work a full-time job. I'm thinking when I retire in about 5 years or less, I'm going to make a decision on what I'm going to do going forward. And I need to know if I'm going to have that support, and because I'm going to have to seek funding to be able to continue to manage the organization in a way that I can be more productive in the community. And I can do that being retired versus trying to work and do an organization. I'm doing interviews like this periodically, and just managing the administrative part of the organization.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I am keeping an eye on time. I want to make sure we're not monopolizing your time. Thanks so much for spending this time with us. I am going to open it up to my colleagues if there are any questions, and then we'll start to wind down if that's all right with you all.
Okay, so sorry. Hi again, I'm Liya Johny. So I had heard that your mother had loved this community of worship, you said, and then you had also said that you had meetings convening in the church. Could you just explain a little more about the role that the church played during this time?
During the time of the meeting with EPA or just the overall?
Yeah, during I guess when your mother was starting Kate, and then when you guys met up and how members remained active within the church and how they offered services.
So the church was a church that my mom grew up in, a church that I grew up in, and a church that some of the community members grew up in. So the church was supportive in providing the space for us. We had a space to house equipment, files and documents and things behind a locked door. They provided the space to have our workshops, our meetings. They were supportive of us, and we paid them, for the space and the time when we had the money, but they were very supportive of the efforts that we were doing in the community. The church benefited from the relocation, from the, not the relocation, they benefited from the settlement with Conoco because they were in the zone where they received funding for the church. At that time, they were very supportive of my mother's efforts. She was their warrior, according to them, and she made a difference. And she was very active in her church. I mean, she knows everybody in Pensacola. So you couldn't do anything as a child of hers without someone calling to let her know, I saw your child down here, and I know she wasn't supposed to be here. Why is she in this, just stuff like that. But they knew Margaret's daughter. Aren't you Margaret's daughter? Yes, I'm Margaret's daughter. Been her daughter all my life. But the church was very supportive, and there were other churches that were supportive as well. We actually did some workshops at a couple of other different churches. We started opening it up to different communities that we would just go to them, make it a little bit more convenient for them. But the church, New Hope Missionary Baptist Church, was very instrumental in providing us the space that we needed after we no longer had an office, because we did have a couple of offices when the organization first started, and then we moved around, and the church provided that space to be able to have the meetings that we were having and the workshops and different events that we were providing.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophia, and I'm also very interested in the church's role. I am particularly interested in was it sort of the main instrument of keeping the community together throughout the relocation process, or were there other facilities or communities that kept you all together and able to organize and stay close?
Well, outside of the church providing the space and us having the funding, food always brings people together. So when you're having an event, it's always good to have good food. That's just my thing. The workshops were, the turnouts were great. We had box lunches catered. We had, Chick-fil-A, Homestead Kitchen. A lot of the local eateries. I would make contact with the manager and get donated soups and salads for our workshops. They were impressed with that, and having that moment where you can fellowship in an environment that you feel comfortable to share information of how stuff is affecting you in your everyday life. And I think, having nourishment is good when you're trying to share bad news to people about stuff that you're being exposed to. I don't know if the connection makes you hear better or listen more. I don't know what it is, but it certainly helps, when you are in a meeting or you're in a workshop and you're getting food for the soul and food for the belly, basically. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Madison. You talked a little bit about the sulfur yellow fog, being able to see it on your window panes, and I'm curious what it looked like, but as well as was it a constant, or was it more prevalent at certain times of day or in different weathers?
So you had that on your windows.
Yeah.
I saw it on our screen. So you want
It
to
depended on which way the wind was blowing. This place was walking distance from our houses, so no farther than
throwing a rock?
Yeah, you can walk to it. So if the wind was blowing toward us, we got the full brunt of all of the toxins coming out of those smokestacks. The whole neighborhood, cars, people, everything, and people would just stay inside, I guess, till it's over. But a lot, like she said, a lot of it happened at night.
Yeah.
So you don't leave your windows open, and you open your curtains, you couldn't see out of them because they're frosted. I mean, you couldn't scrape it off. It actually got it to the window. So you can imagine what it was doing to people's bodies and working around us.
And then your porch furniture. Who thinks they need to cover their porch furniture up? Who does that? And so, and then you sitting on furniture, he's got immune issues from his elbow being on this furniture where all this sulfur has been landing, all these chemicals. Nobody thinks about that. His dog, when I met him, he had a dog that looked like a pony. He called him Smokey. He was a big lab dog. And he used to petrify me, but I think the dog liked me. He had me cornered between the door and the screen door one day. But the dog had all kind of
Lesions from coming in contact with the dirt.
laying in the dirt. And he had to put him down because he wasn't going to survive. I mean, just laying in the dirt. And you would see these huge, beautiful red plums and pomegranates and blackberries that we ate.
So we didn't relate the
We didn't
toxicity
know.
to any of that stuff.
We didn't know. We didn't know. I mean, and yellow sulfur on your window screen. So we can't, we used, like I said, we used to sleep with our windows up. And it was okay and a lot safer 80 years ago, 70 years ago, 60 years ago. You can't do that now. Not only is it not safe, you still don't know what's floating around in the air
That's true.
that you're exposing yourself to. That's why it's important you have to clean your filters. Everything that has a filter needs to be changed. Some people don't even know that.
Makes you wonder, how do we survive without air conditioners and all
Yeah.
this,
So
Just made us tougher.
it's all about education and empowerment.
Thank you.
Well, I have 1,000 questions that I will not ask you today. I just have one more question, though, in thinking about all of this, and it's something that we've asked everyone we've spoken to this weekend. But what would justice look like for y'all?
Justice would look like going back to every person who has been affected by those relocations and making those wrongs right. Commercialize those properties and pay them what their property is worth from a perspective of a commercial real estate. Provide a medical monitoring program that will last and work with these individuals to help. You can't get rid of the problem, but you can certainly manage some of these conditions that these individuals have and try to improve their quality of life. That's what justice would look like. What would it look like for you?
Well, it would be a lot cheaper for the government to do it now, because how many years post and how many people have died since? So justice would be from, making everybody whole that wasn't made whole, that's still alive, to furthering this on any other relocations, not making the same mistakes with the people. I don't care who they are. I don't care if they're Indian. I don't care who they are. Yeah. They're black, white. People should be treated equally when it comes to the law.
Yeah.
And you're seeing some of this stuff play out with where these trains blew up here in Kentucky or somewhere recently. My heart goes out to those people, because it could have happened to us.
Is it Ohio, Palestine?
Palestine, yeah. So it's not something that's going to go away. It's going to keep happening. But our government needs to respond, not adequately, but they need to respond immediately, like it's an immediate emergency, and get those people out of the areas and provide them to make them whole again.
And putting policies in place to have our industries be better neighbors to the people that work, live, and play in their communities. They come to us, they bring the contamination to us. We don't go looking for it, they bring it to us. And putting in regulations and policies, uniform relocation policies, not just for military bases, but a policy for a residential community, no color, but a uniform relocation policy to be effective, that every person in that community will be made whole, just like you said, not just pick and choose. And have a person to make sure that there is no divide and conquer, and to bring the community together to work together and make it better for themselves. That would make everyone whole. That would be justice. And to make sure that these kinds of things don't happen again, and that we have our communities protected from industries that go in there and contaminate these areas. There's a way to do something without bringing harm to the people that have to live there. There's always a way, always a better way to do it. Yeah, it may cost money, but it's still better. And you're doing what's right, not what's profitable, what is right. You're going to make money anyway. Just do the right thing. That's all we ask. Be better neighbors.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have one more question related to that, and that is in thinking about, for instance, the folks in Palestine, Ohio, or other communities or residents in other places that are maybe starting to work together or strategize about, hey, we're noticing this issue in our community and we need to do something about it. What is some advice or some lessons that you all have learned in doing this work that you might tell them or relay?
Working together is very important. You can get more done in large numbers than you can in less. And if you had multiple communities to come together and form that coalition and work together, you can get things done a lot better. And I think that if we see more communities, I don't care what color they are, if they are experiencing environmental issues, we all have that same problem. We have the same problem. And we all should be treated with respect and dignity, just like any other community that they go in and they make whole. It shouldn't be about your race, but we know that it is. It's environmental injustice. Environmental racism is what it is. And it plays a big part in where these contaminants go. Because again, you're going into communities that are least resistant. They don't have the resources to fight, and that's why they rely on communities, advocates, people that know other people to get that information across and get it out there. It can't be ignored forever. And the people that are ignoring it and think that there's no climate change, I hate it for them, because it is real. It is very real. Anything else?
No.
No?
Well, thank you again so much for being so generous with us and spending so much time and sharing with us this morning. Before we end, is there anything else that y'all want to mention? Again, I have 1,000 questions that are still in my mind and on this paper, but is there anything else that you all want to share with us today that maybe we didn't think to ask about, or that didn't occur to me to ask you?
No, I can't think of anything. I appreciate the opportunity to keep my mother's legacy alive. It's always heartwarming that, and I'm sorry that I get so emotional. I miss her so much. I, I miss her words. I miss her voice. I miss her guidance so much. Sometimes it's a little hard for me to move forward with doing something right now because, I have so much on my plate. But I always cherish the opportunity to share my mother with others. She was a mother to me. but she was a warrior to a lot of people. And she really impacted the lives of individuals in this community, whether they realize it or not, you know. And it wasn't the worst thing in the world that happened, it was something that needed to occur.
Exactly.
It needed to happen. And this is stuff we see every day, all over the world. And I just, I thank you for this opportunity to be able to share a part of my mom with you guys. Anything you want to say?
Well, it's certainly our honor and our privilege. So